Access to conservation programs by historically underserved farmers and ranchers will come to order. Good morning, and thank you very much for being here today as we review access to conservation programs by historically underserved farmers and ranchers. Sustainable agriculture must be a welcoming and rewarding profession, especially for our historically underserved producers, which includes our minority, women, beginning, and veteran farmers and ranchers, as well as those who have limited financial resources. Historically underserved farmers face a range of unique challenges. Some of their families have been farming for generations but have faced discrimination and insufficient access to capital and credit. Others have limited farming experience or come up against misinformed stereotypes, and they may find that existing tools do not adequately meet their needs. Title II programs seek to protect our soils, water, wildlife, and other natural resources while improving production of food and fiber. Achieving this goal requires that we support our producers and account for the variety of challenges that they face. Congress has enacted a number of policies designed to address the needs of historically underserved producers. Specifically, the 2018 Farm Bill built upon this effort, establishing additional tools and incentives to overcome barriers and bolster across-the-board participation. Data show us that historically underserved farmers and ranchers are increasingly accessing conservation programs. While this trend is encouraging, historically underserved producers continue to account for a disproportionately small share of agricultural producers relative to their numbers in the general population. We must continue to invest in and shape conservation programs so that they better account for structural barriers and recognize the contributions of historically underserved farmers and ranchers. A continued emphasis on equity in the delivery of Title II programs is needed to ensure broad participation in conservation programs. I hope with this hearing we can delve into the substantial barriers that stand between historically underserved producers and full utilization of USDA conservation programs, that we can discuss the implementation of targeted policies included in the 2018 Farm Bill and build a better pathway towards attracting more farmers to conservation programs. In consultation with the ranking member and pursuant to Rule 11E, I want to make members of the subcommittee aware that other members of the full committee may join us today. I now recognize Ranking Member Lamar for his opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you to our chair, Ms. Spanberger, for calling today's hearing and being such a good working partner here, so appreciate it. Today we are reviewing the access to the nation's voluntary conservation programs. For the last 20 years, Congress has made significant investment to these programs by providing our farmers and ranchers the tools necessary to protect and conserve not only land, but their way of life. Congress has also made a conscious effort to make certain underserved producers, including the socially disadvantaged, limited resource, and beginning farmers and ranchers, that are not overlooked when applying for assistance. Since 2008, both the EQIP program, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and the CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, have received 5% of the funds for new and beginning farmers, reserved 5% for new and beginning farmers to encourage the adoption of conservation practices by our next generation of producers. Additionally, another 5% is set aside for socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers in both programs to help provide access to this conservation funding. It should be noted, over the last decade, NRCS has exceeded these allocations, obligated over 16% of CSP funding, and 33% of EQIP funding to beginning farmers and historically underserved producers. Since 2014, Congress has also recognized the contributions of our men and women in uniform by improving outreach and assistance for our veterans by authorizing a military veterans agricultural liaison at USDA, and by creating new programs and priorities to help in their transitions to careers in agriculture. Recently, the 2018 Farm Bill improved upon all these efforts by encouraging USDA to provide outreach to historically underserved farmers and ranchers to boost participation in the Regional Conservation Partnership Program and to provide advanced payments in EQIP, just to name a few. I do want to mention that the deliberation of the last Farm Bill brought forward many concerns regarding access to land. There's a significant reason why the Conservation Reserve Program was reformed to eliminate government competition with farmers for productive land by reducing rental rates, as well as expanding the Transition Incentive Program, known as TIP. Additionally, NRCS has engaged partnerships through several cooperative agreements for outreach, and since 2012, they have worked in a collaborative effort to provide outreach and forest management technical assistance to the heirs property landowners. Sustainable Forestry and African American Land Retention Partnership, which includes the Forest Service and the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, was initially a 2-year project in 3 states. Since then, the pilot has exceeded expectations, as in the process of adding new partners and more than doubling the number of states across the Southeast. We have a great set of witnesses here today. I'm looking forward to hearing the continuing discussion on what can be done to improve this access to conservation programs for all producers. Indeed, it's very important in my own neighborhood there with the rice industry and the great environmental and wildlife benefits it's provided there. I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lamalfa. The chair would would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure that there is ample time for questions. I would like to welcome our witnesses here today. Thank you so much for being with us. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome Mr. Irvin Delaney White, who farms in Louisa, Virginia, back home in the 7th District. Mr. White raises 250 cow-calf pairs, raises 250 cow-calf pairs on an operation on 8 different properties, totaling more than 2,000 acres. In addition to his cattle operation, he designs and installs rotational grazing systems, fencing, working pens, alternative watering systems, and stream crossings for farmers throughout Central Virginia. Our next witness is Ms. Kimberly Lafleur. Ms. Lafleur owns and operates a 112-acre cranberry farm and agritourism business in Plimpton, Massachusetts. She is also the state advisor and program director for the Massachusetts FFA Association and an independent consultant to agricultural organizations. Ms. Lafleur serves as the chair of the Plymouth County Conservation District's board. Our third witness is Quentin Robinson. Mr. Robinson is a native of Gordon, Georgia, where he grew up assisting his family with the production and marketing of vegetable crops. Quentin is a practicing attorney and serves as the policy advisor for the Rural Coalition. Our final witness is Mr. Andrew J. Sanchez, a 5th-generation operator and the majority owner of his family's cattle ranch in Sierra County, New Mexico. Mr. Sanchez served more than 8 years of active duty with the U.S. Navy and currently serves as a lieutenant colonel in the New Mexico Air National Guard. We will now proceed to hearing from our witnesses. Each of you will have 5 minutes to present testimony. When the light in front of you turns yellow, that indicates there's 1 minute left to complete your testimony. Mr. White, would you please begin when you are ready?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member Lamalfa, and the distinguished members of the committee. The first thing I want to tell you is just, it's a real honor to be here. And as I was trying to get my thoughts together for this, which is obviously not something I'm very good at, so excuse me for the first minute or so here. Hopefully I'll get it all together. But talking to the farmers that I work with to try and get my thoughts together here, I talked to extension agents, I talked to Farm Bureau, I talked to the waitress at the Mexican restaurant we went to on Sunday night. And what was amazing is every one of them thought that this was good, it was positive, and the respect they had for what you people do was universal through all of them. So I just want to tell y'all that the people back home in my district, and I'm sure all the other districts, are looking to you and are appreciative of what you do every day, and it's a big deal. So thank you for having me, and I'm sure the others as well are glad to be here and have an opportunity to bring something to hopefully shape things for the future. As my bio you talked through, I'm kind of like a graduate of the Young Farmer Program. I started farming in the late 90s after I graduated the University of Virginia, and I didn't grow up on a farm. I decided this is what I want to do, and it's been a long road. I had a great plan at 25 years old of how it was all going to work out, and I used the programs. I got through it, and I was like, definitely by the time I'm 35, I'm just going to be farming. It's all going to be just roses. I'm going to have a truck and a tractor and a few cows, and I'll just be on this farm. And now 20 years later, it hadn't quite worked out, but it's all great. I wouldn't change it for a minute. But what I've been able to do with working with NRCS and the soil and water districts and extension is those people have helped me work my plan down and figure out a lot of things. And it's very important to keep this support. I mean, these programs are very, very good and used by farmers every day. And, you know, getting that extra set of eyes out on the farm to help people hone in and work through ideas and how things change are, it's excuse me, it's really making things better on the farm every day for people. And the young farmer program is what I've come through. It's what I do all day, every day, and getting out there and working with the young farmers now and helping them out to where things are always changing. The market conditions, you know, they can mess everything up. But if you're doing things right, if you use the conservation programs and you're building up your farm, you can weather these storms and keep moving forward. So, I'm sorry for flopping here, but I'm gonna give the rest of my time and move on to Ms. Lafleur next to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. I understand completely. I'm sure you noticed I fumbled a couple of the words in my opening statement as well. But I'm so grateful that you're here.
Yeah.
We certainly do this more often, and we all make mistakes. But I thought your opening statement was fantastic, and I thank you so much for being here.
The farmers back home said if I could just get y'all to sit in the back of the truck and we'd go for about a 2-hour ride, I could really explain things a lot better.
Well, as a Virginian, be careful what you ask for, Mr. White. Thank you so much for your comments. And Ms. Lafleur, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me this morning to testify on the important topic of access to conservation programs by the historically underserved farmers and ranchers. My name is Kim Lafleur, and I, along with my husband Jeff, own and operate Mayflower Cranberries, a 112-acre cranberry operation and agritourism business in Plimpton, Massachusetts. I am the State Advisor and Program Director for the Massachusetts FFA Association, and I'm proudly serving as the second Vice President for the National Association of Conservation Districts. Jeff and I are first-generation farmers who grow for Ocean Spray, a farmer-owned cooperative consisting of more than 700 cranberry growers. We are proud that Ocean Spray is committed to becoming the first fruit cooperative in North America to verify 100% of its crop as sustainably grown. To meet this goal, Ocean Spray is benchmarking our bogs to the Farm Sustainability Assessment, a tool developed by the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative platform. Criteria we seek to meet include protecting and improving the natural environment, protecting and improving the social and economic conditions of farmers, as well as the efficient production of safe, high-quality products. The importance of this commitment belies the 2019 harvest that saw the second largest drop in production in over 50 years, largely due to atypical and unpredictable weather and climate. As first-generation farmers, Jeff and I have been able to take advantage of important federal resources to improve conservation outcomes. While conservation practices and technologies are critical to preserving our wetlands and bogs, they are often expensive investments, especially for first-generation farmers. This is where access to USDA programs is imperative. Our ability to implement conservation practices was as a result of the relationship we had with our local conservation district. Outreach activities conducted by the district resulted in a conservation plan for every cranberry operation in the region. We received the benefit of a highly specialized farm plan for our unique crop to protect water quality and enhance water conservation. And our farm plan provides a roadmap on which we use to make management decisions. At the heart of conservation programs is access. Producers need access to information, technology, financial, and technical assistance. Massachusetts is the third most densely populated state in the nation. Farming here is becoming ever more difficult as we compete with an increasing population that is competing for the same limited land resources for housing and recreation. Conservation technical assistance is also limited, but when coupled with underserved producers, it makes the delta to be able to serve this need even wider. Through my work with FFA members, I see firsthand a generation of young women who are wanting to have a career in production agriculture, but lack the financial and technical resources to do so. In Massachusetts, 65% of our members are female, but yet we don't see that translate into the agricultural workforce. Direct outreach must occur to help bridge the gap from interested in agriculture to working in agriculture if we want to ensure that women play a greater role moving forward. USDA can and should do more to reach the historically underserved populations within and outside the conservation space. One of the greatest barriers to access for all producers is when a producer's local USDA service center lacks adequate capacity to both process program applications and conduct needed outreach. This barrier is even greater for historically underserved producers who may not be familiar with the opportunities provided through USDA to help their operation. USDA must consider the extra outreach to these producers when conducting workload analysis to determine needed staffing. Congress must continue to provide the needed funding and oversight to NRCS so that NRCS can reach producers where they are, rather than hope that they enter a USDA service center. One of the answers to improved access to conservation programs may lie in front of us. With 3,000 conservation districts nationwide, this locally led delivery system has been in place for more than 80 years. Districts have a rich history of working with NRCS and provide education and leadership opportunities. They work side by side with NRCS staff at the local level. However, there is an opportunity to enhance this relationship to provide increased access to programs to underserved producers. In a historically male-dominated industry, there are still changes that are needed to ensure access is equitable to all. However, through strong partnerships and outreach with underserved communities, the path towards a solution becomes clear. As a female producer, I don't want a seat at a special table. I want a seat at the same one as everyone else. Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Robinson, you may begin when you're ready.
Good morning, Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and members of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry. I serve as the Agriculture Policy Advisor for the Rural Coalition. We are a community-based organization, and we advocate on behalf of limited resource and minority farmers and ranchers across the United States. Thousands of hardworking farm families share their economic victories with the Rural Coalition on a daily basis. These families also express their frustrations caused by programmatic hurdles that make it impossible to survive in today's increasing competitive markets and adapting technology on the farm. The Rural Coalition operates as a grassroots model, and we listen closely to the farmers that we represent, who are by and large multicultural farm families. And we, over the past 40 years, have made great attempts to inform the Congress about new legislation and administrative improvements in USDA's programs that make life on the farm easier for limited resource producers. I'll just say very clearly that the farmers and ranchers that we represent are hardworking farm families. They are law-abiding citizens, and we believe that they play a very critical role in helping our nation maintain and expand its role as the world's paramount leader in the production and marketing of an abundant, safe, and affordable supply of food and fiber. I want to, in my comments, highlight some of the improvements in the 2018 Farm Bill that I believe will go a very long way in improving the conservation needs and the economic and social well-being of the farmers that we represent. These improvements in the law make conservation practices more attainable for small and limited resource farmers and ranchers. But if the farmers that we represent, whether it's a rancher from Oklahoma or a row crop producer from Arkansas, would really say to you today, thank you for the opportunity to hear their voices and once again to thank you for for the efforts that you made in the 2018 Farm Bill to make conservation programs more attainable to limited resource farmers and producers. Now a bit about the conservation challenges and the set-aside funding in the Farm Bill and how that all works. Similar to all producers, minority farmers and ranchers face, conservation challenges in their farm enterprises, whether it's cow-calf operation, organic vegetables, and more recently, industrial hemp. And the Farm Bill provides for 5% set aside of overall funding for NRCS, 5% set aside for new and beginning farmers, and 5% set aside for socially disadvantaged farmers. And most of the state conservationists around the country who use these funds will tell you that they utilize all of their funds on an annual basis. But the farmers have a regulatory right, if it's a new and beginning farmer, a veteran farmer, or a minority farmer, to up to a 90% cost share. And within this 90% cost share, a farmer that we represent, they will get a 50% fee advance payment up front. They're responsible for the next 40%, and then that 40% is reimbursed. And one recommendation that I would make clear here today is that in many cases, some of the farmers that we represent will have difficulties coming up with the 40%. And one thing that we're working with NRCS is for the state conservationists and the secretary to use their regulatory flexibility to waive that 40% in the appropriate circumstances, so that the conservation practice is not eliminated because the farmer can't come up with the cost. And so with that, I'll end my remarks, and I look forward to answering any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Sanchez, please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member Lamalfa, members of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry, for this opportunity to testify on opportunities and benefits available to military veterans in agriculture. I'm the 5th generation to operate my cattle ranch in Sierra County in rural southern New Mexico. And this land was originally homesteaded in the territory of New Mexico in the late 1800s. My family has been running cattle there ever since, and I'm currently in the process of purchasing the land from my father, Adam Sanchez. When I was young, I wanted a life of adventure and a chance to fly, and saw minimal opportunity in Truth or Consequences, or Alamogordo, where I graduated from high school. My parents recognized they couldn't change my mind, and I joined the Navy at 17. I served as an active duty naval flight officer for 9 years, and my service took me around the globe. All this led me back to the place where I've always considered home, and that's rural New Mexico. Now I operate the farm where I was raised, and I see the same desire to escape in my children, and like my parents, I pray that I can instill just a bit that calling that'll bring them back to the land where their family legacy thrives. As a young man, my sole ambition was to find a way to leave the ranch and find success in the larger world. Now I'm faced with the same decisions that my father had to make, which is to how do I raise my family without losing this legacy? My grandfather was the last generation to successfully live on the ranch. My dad had to work close enough to commute to the ranch on weekends and holidays, and I would spend summers living with my grandparents at the ranch until they passed. I became the chief operator of my ranch in 2011, and I'm the sole provider for my wife and 2 children at that time, and now 3. And the farm income is not enough to support my family. As is the case with many Americans, I was forced to find off-the-farm work, and in my case, I joined the New Mexico Air National Guard. Returning the farm full-time, I faced the same obstacles that many beginning farmers confront. The ranch was in somewhat neglect, and I had to rebuild it. I first applied for EQIP as a beginning farmer and rancher when I needed a new well which stopped pumping in the late 80s. I was awarded this grant, and upon finishing that project, I knew that it wouldn't be enough to fully revive the ranch. So I applied again in 2014 for a second grant to run additional pipeline and other drinker and additional storage, which was critically needed to ensure greater forage coverage and keep the cattle from overgrazing certain areas. My application was denied for 2 years due to the amount of points on the EQIP request. This was despite the USDA, NRCS helping me compile more projects in the proposal and increasing the point value. And it wasn't until I applied using my veteran status that I was awarded the grant. My status as a military veteran afforded me the benefit of competing with fewer applicants for this EQIP, and it also awarded me the supplementary payout to put in the additional storage. Most importantly, it allowed me to complete this additional $38,000 in projects without putting my family's livelihood at risk. However, due to the timing restrictions and the definition under the 2018 Farm Bill, next year I will no longer be eligible for USDA veteran benefits, as I will have been out of the Navy for 10 years. The USDA veteran program modified in the 2018 Farm Bill have direct positive impact on farmer veterans. I elaborate on them in my written testimony. However, the change in the definition veteran farmer or rancher prevents a wide swath of farmer veterans from profiting from these benefits. The new statute defines a farmer or rancher is one who served in the armed forces, has not operated a farm or ranch, or has operated a farm or ranch for not more than 10 years, and who first obtained status as a veteran during the most recent 10-year period. The data on veteran farmers does not support such a change as a large number who enter agriculture more than 10 years after having left the military. Most of them are still quite young. As a result of this language, a large number of the target audience will not have access to these benefits. I'm a sailor, I'm an airman, I'm a farmer. I fought for our nation's freedom, and I continue to fight to feed my nation and preserve the way of life that is slowly dying. USDA veteran preference programs are essential in keeping rural America alive for our veterans, and like me, come from small towns and return to these small towns after service. In closing, I would like to recommend the following. Continue support of USDA, VA's, and DOD's effort to educate, encourage veteran opportunities in agribusiness. Continue to fund USDA programs addressing veterans, especially the conservation programs. Consider modifying the definition of veteran farmer or rancher to remove who first obtained status as a veteran during the most recent 10-year period. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Members will now be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the hearing, and after that, we will recognize members in order of their arrival. And I first recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Sanchez, I have a quick follow-up question for you. When you were talking about the data regarding veterans who are not able to access the programs because their veteran status, that 10-year time frame expires. In your experience and from what you've seen, is that for veteran farmers who come into generational family farms but may not take over ownership? What are some of the reasons why that 10-year period, from what you've seen, will run out?
Yes, ma'am. So from what I've seen during the TAP and the exit out of the military, there isn't a big education process on going into agriculture. A lot of people find it on their own, I guess. For me, it was just what I grew up doing. I didn't really decide I was going to go back there, and it took me, so I got out in '09, and it took me 2 years to really find my way back to actually doing it. So that 10-year gap, there's a lot of different reasons that they don't return immediately, but falling under the minority and underserved, I'm Hispanic for a lifetime, African American for a lifetime, and when I hang up that uniform, I'm a veteran for a lifetime. So I don't know why we have a 10-year ending date on that status.
And you mentioned that you were initially denied for 2 years until you realized that there was the veteran aspect. Was it previously, prior to that, you did not realize that that was an opportunity for you to apply under the veteran program?
Yes, ma'am. I applied at the beginning, farmer rancher, for the first one, but I didn't realize they had a veteran-specific set aside until I talked with the Farmer Veteran Coalition, and they educated me to saying, hey, you need to apply for as a veteran, and then that was also one of the underserved categories that I could apply to separately.
Thank you very much. I think that speaks to some of the points that Ms. Lafleur was making regarding education about these issues. My next question is for Mr. White. Thank you very much for being with us. Your operations, some of your operations are based in Louisa County within the district I am proud to represent, so I'm particularly appreciative that you are here. Appreciative you are all here, but it's good to see a fellow Virginian. Beginning farmers play a key role in agriculture and conservation, and in Virginia's 7th Congressional District, a third of our producers are new and beginning farmers. According to the Census of Agriculture, the number of new and beginning farmers in the U.S. increased by 82% from 2012 to 2017. And this is an encouraging trend, but the census also revealed that the number of farmers who reported operating for a period of 6 to 10 years declined by roughly 7%, suggesting that if entry into agriculture is challenging, actually staying in agriculture is even more challenging. Can you speak from your experiences to the role of conservation programs in helping farms to remain financially viable as they attempt to thrive? And what else can we be doing to ensure that these programs are helping farmers stay profitable and resilient?
Yes, ma'am. So the first part of that has a lot to do with timing of what was happening in the farm economy. 12, 13, 14 as people were getting in, we're going into a peak of commodity prices, beef cattle prices are going up, and then everything kind of tanked a little bit here, which we're dealing with the downside now. So with cattle and crop and all, you have to look at the long term and see these programs. They're working, they're helping, but there's going to be certain classes of young farmers that might not succeed because of outside market forces. And you don't want to write off the program as not working because this class of young farmers coming in had a hard time. The outside economy, was a large contributing factor to what got them.
Thank you for the context on that. And so generally speaking, as you perceive it, the elements of the conservation programs that you yourself are engaged with in terms of fencing and helping nearby ranchers in Central Virginia, do you see those as a path for which farmers and ranchers can pursue to ensure that they're creating greater sustainability for their farms?
Yeah, most definitely. What you do on the farm, the improvements you make, the conservation for sustainability, that's all like your savings account on the farm. You build up your soil, you build up your infrastructure, and when the market treats you good, you're making money and you keep going. If you're always taken away from the farm, you're depleting, and it doesn't matter whether the market's going up or down, you're going down. But the savings you put into the farm, the infrastructure you build, all that sustainability that you build up is going to be what helps the farm in the long term. Don't let the snapshot take away from the programs in general, because the programs are good.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, would you like to make a statement? Thank you. Thank you very much. I now recognize Ranking Member Lamalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you again. Appreciate the panel, and Irvin, hey, I'm just a dirt farmer. Just got a tie now, so don't worry about how this works, okay? So just plow through. So appreciate you all being here. Ms. Lafleur, First of all, I'm fascinated by what you do way up there in the Northeast. I grow a crop in a flooded field situation myself, but it's not anything like what you do, rice versus cranberries. So I have a couple questions, but I want to ask you one more on a production basis. How deep do you keep those bogs with water? And I'm sure it varies as you harvest and such, but.
Well, contrary to popular belief, the cranberries actually grow dry. They actually don't like to be too wet, so unless we are actively protecting for frost in the winter or deep freeze in the winter or harvest, the bogs remain dry.
And you keep the vines year after year. It's not an annual in any way, right?
Yes, sir. We have some of the vines on our property have been growing since the 1880s.
Wow, amazing. Okay. Well, I guess that would define the word sustainable, at least in one way. So, and that's what I wanted to ask you about a little bit, are the practices that are required to be certified as sustainable, is it a mandated thing? Is it something that the producers and their association come up with? And is there a certifying entity outside that says you meet some standard for what sustainability would be? I know you said 100% for across the whole industry, which is pretty remarkable.
So we're using the Farm Sustainability Assessment Tool, and certified by an outside entity, which is looking at the conservation practices that growers implement. So our typical practices involve water quality, water conservation, and pollinator habitat. And those can be anything from the construction of tailwater recovery areas, bypass canals, water control structures, sanding practices, et cetera. The practices for the sustainability certification are actually up to the individual producer and which ones they implement. However, their ranking, and this tool uses a gold, silver, bronze ranking system. How they rank depends on the number of practices that they implement.
And so what is the value of that score for the industry or the individual producer as far as marketability or, favor amongst regulators? How do you quantify that?
Well, it's really twofold. It is the environmental aspect of sustainability, doing the right thing, taking care of our water resources. We farm in a wetland. We use water resources pretty intensively. Making sure that our water resources and we're using that water smartly is important. The economic side of it is just as important, as it enhances our ability to market our crop. The American public is looking more and more into the business practices of cooperatives like Ocean Spray, or really any producer, and looking at their business model and their plans and how their farmers deliver the product to them. So ultimately, the marketability and how we're able to brand our products with our ultimate goal of being 100% sustainably grown. Again, it's a lofty goal, but one that we as grower owners, members of Ocean Spray, have committed to.
Talk a little bit about the outreach aspect. I'd like to hear from a couple of you on that if we have the time. Are we doing 2 rounds? Okay, we'll have time. So what does the outreach look like? Now, are you talking to people that are not in farming at all and you want to get them involved, or is the outreach more about people that are in agriculture, maybe their family was, and maybe they're not aware of some of the conservation? What are the different tiers of outreach in effect? How are you finding people to outreach to, et cetera?
For us, it's at our conservation district level, our outreach involves both producers and non-producers. As I mentioned, we live in a pretty densely populated state. We farm literally within view of our neighbors. They see and have an opinion about everything that we do. So conservation at the heart is about doing the right thing. But at the same time, it's also making sure that that right thing puts us in a position where we can avoid regulators coming in and telling us how we must do things, because we've taken those advanced steps to make sure that we're farming in a smart way. Again, using water resources smartly, minimizing inputs, again, saves time, saves labor, all comes down to the bottom line. Outreach efforts we use social media a lot. We do trade association meetings is another great outreach effort in order to reach the current producers, but to reach the next generation. We have a lot of people who are interested in agriculture, but they are afraid or don't know where to take that next step. So if we're going to encourage more people to enter agriculture, however, at whatever scale, we need to reach them where they are. And for us, that is a multifaceted social media, trade association meetings, and direct mailings.
Okay, I'm over time here, so thank you. And Mr. Robinson, I'll come to you with that question in the next round too, so you can ruminate on that. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Maine for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing. And to all of you, thanks so much for your testimony and telling us a little more about some of the challenges that the farmers here associated with face. I want to have a chance in my next question to talk a little bit about staffing levels and outreach, because I think that's critically important at USDA right now. But since I know it'll come up a lot, I want to also discuss climate change. And I spent a lot of time working on how farmers can participate in some of the positive aspects of mitigating climate change, but also many of the challenges that people are facing with erratic weather. I, too, am a small farmer. I'm from the state of Maine, so welcome to our fellow New Englander. And we are challenged in a variety of ways. Luckily, we're a fairly high rainfall state, but we've been having excess rainfall in the spring and then droughts in the summer. And that presents a challenge, particularly if the irrigation systems aren't working or we don't have the capacity to irrigate. But I'm just interested in hearing from all of you if there are ways that you know that agriculture has been affected by weather, other issues around climate change in your area. And maybe Ms. Lafleur, you could start out, because you talked a little bit about the real challenges last year with the yield in cranberry growing, and I appreciate your steadfast cranberry growing in Massachusetts, because we don't want you guys to have to go away.
Thank you. The weather and climate change played a pretty significant impact on the crop of cranberries nationwide. Of course, things are cyclical. Some growers had a great crop, other growers had dramatic reductions. We're seeing, in particular growing regions, had a lot of issues with winter kill. And for that particular growing region, they're not used to dealing with those extreme temperatures. So their management practices and how they would typically manage their bogs in the winter, if they held status quo, well, last winter was not status quo for them. So looking at different ways and how we can mitigate, those issues. Again, I mentioned before, we use water. In times of drought, we've had years where there's not enough water to harvest. For certain growers, we release our water to growers downstream from us that depend on our water to harvest their bogs. And so it's a coordinated effort. But the impacts of climate change is something that is not lost on producers. How to mitigate those impacts, I suppose, is still the big question.
Anyone else have experiences or?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. So, right. So using that EQIP, the first EQIP that I talked about in 2011 to dig that well. So when my grandparents put that well in, they dug it by hand and used a windmill. It was a seasonal spring that would run about 3 months out of the year, and they dug it, and it was only about 30 feet down. When I had to redig that well, I had to take it down to 270 feet to hit water. So it is a lot different. I don't know if it's the water usage, especially in New Mexico, where it's a dry climate, that as population grows, we're using more and more water, so it's driving it more and more into the aquifers. But yeah, it is impacting agriculture big time.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your question. Particularly with blueberries in your state, we've had an opportunity to speak with some of the growers, and they have informed us that as it warms earlier in the season, it brings in a different type of more vicious pest. And if that particular grower has an existing conservation plan that already has a certain number of practices in it or cost, to go back to NRCS and make changes to that plan can sometimes be problematic, obviously costly. But in this particular farm bill, there's a specific section in Title II which allows or gives the state conservationists more flexibility to make changes to existing plans so that the grower can have some flexibility of adapting to those climate change scenarios that you mentioned. So it's just a matter of once again, outreach, making sure that the farmer knows about the state conservationist's ability to make waivers and be flexible with an existing plan.
Great, thank you. Mr. White, I'll catch you on the next round because I'm out of time. Thank you. If you have thoughts, I'll be happy to hear them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I want to thank the panel for just a week before Christmas, and hopefully we get out of here this week. But thank you for taking your time to be here and for what you do for this country. Particularly Lieutenant Colonel Sanchez, first I'd like to thank you for your service. I'm grateful that after serving your country abroad and continuing to serve at home, you're now able to enjoy the very land that you swore to protect. It's encouraging to see veterans like yourself farming and ranching, and our military is unparalleled in developing leaders, and our leaders are military leaders are mission-oriented and capable of running organizations in an efficient and very thorough manner. Obviously, this is important in our ag industry. We need a new generation of leaders, such as yourself, that will join, and if we are to remain competitive in the global market. The first question is kind of broad, but if you could identify, say, 4 things that are obstacles that prevent most of our veterans like yourself who are interested in farming that keep you from going into agriculture after retiring, what would those 4 things be?
Well, thank you. I think I can think of 2 that pop into my head right away. I think the big 2 is the information piece. I know in my case, I grew up on the ranch, but back then I was a farmhand. That's the way my dad treated me. Mm-hmm. So taking ownership of the ranch and becoming the operator and turning that into a business and focus was something I didn't really know about. I knew how to work cattle, and knew how to brand, I knew how to mend fences, and just really getting that information to the veterans as they come out, either in a TAP, in the transition assistance, or any of that stuff. Agriculture isn't a big focus on getting out, even though we come from rural towns. In Sierra County, where I came from, we had to close the National Guard Armory in Sierra County because there's just not enough opportunity. When I moved back, Walmart came in, and it's not a thing on Walmart, but there was a front page article that said Walmart couldn't even find enough employees to open up at Walmart. They had to bring people from outside the county. So people are leaving those small towns, and to get them back there, they're not aware of all the options as far as the EQIP and the NRCS and stuff, so getting that information is big. And then the second big one I would say is the availability and access to land. I'm lucky enough that I come from a family that had that land. It was, like I said, homesteaded, and it's been passed down. But a lot of these young kids that come off the farm and stuff like that, when they're going back, that access to get their own place and build their own farm is very difficult.
Well, I too was a farm hand, and of course my father was, I don't know, several generations of farmers, because frankly back before World War II, you know, our economy, I think 98% of the workforce was in the agribusiness in some way, and now it's less than 2%. One of the things that I might add to this, and I've got just a few seconds, is obviously there's been a lot of talk about commodity prices. We had the Secretary of Agriculture here when he first was appointed, Senator Perdue, and I asked him about commodity prices, because obviously farm income, which was stable in 2012, but when I got here in 2014, it had dropped 50%, farm income. And so in the next round, we'll talk about commodity prices in that fourth item that we didn't get to in this one. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I now recognize the gentleman from Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This is an important issue for my constituents, and thank you for being here today. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's 2017 census, Arizona's 1st Congressional District is home to nearly 19,000 Native American producers. This is not a surprise, given that the tribes of Arizona have a rich history in agriculture. While the changes made in the 2018 Farm Bill were in consultation with tribes from across the country, they are only a single step in the right direction. More work needs to be done. As I learned from my Navajo constituents who live in many farms, a chapter house in Arizona, access to the Environmental Quality Initiatives program is a significant barrier to use of USDA conservation dollars for many tribal producers. In fact, the government built them a beautiful irrigation system, and the end result was they built it wrong. 80% of the water still goes downstream instead of into the reservoir that they built. And we still haven't been able to get that corrected. And this is tens of millions of dollars that has been wasted. I asked that we work together as a committee to revisit the eligibility requirements of the program. Additionally, youth are the future of agriculture in our nation, and our participation in federal programs is critical to the future success and accessibility of these programs. In fact, I think there's a rural crisis in making sure we keep our family farms. My family lost their farm, my grandfather, in the Depression, and my father had worked the farm, and afterwards, family members during the summer, dairy farmers, I had the pleasure of leaving urban America and going back to the farm and helping out while they went on vacation. Providing more resources to Natural Resources Conservation Service and other USD programs to create more internship opportunities for Native youth with recruitment directly from tribal communities will serve this purpose and for the rest of our country. Natural Resources Conservation Services advertises summer intern programs nationally, but few opportunities are offered in Indian country. I encourage USDA to consider creating more opportunities for Native youth in Indian country. Further, many producers in my district are veterans. Arizona is home to more than 600,000 veterans, and we have a moral obligation to ensure the brave Americans who have fought and sacrificed for us to receive all benefits they have earned. Lieutenant Colonel Sanchez, thank you for your service to our country. Your testimony highlights the fact that producers in the Southwest face unique challenges. This makes the assistance and resources provided by the USDA more important in ensuring veterans can be successful in agricultural enterprises. My district borders on New Mexico. When they finish their service and they can raise a family doing so. How do you make it easier on returning service members like yourself to begin operating an agricultural enterprise? We want you to succeed. We need for you to succeed. And I think in relationship to the other question was asked, how do we early on get this? Because we have you captured for a while towards the end of your career. And to me, we're wasting an opportunity to get that type of information to you unless you're getting it already, to be able to be successful on looking into a career that you have interest in and have had in the past. What is the best way to educate service members and transitioning out of the service and into the opportunity of your choice?
Yes, sir. Well, thank you. I think the 2018 Farm Bill that created the Veteran Liaison is a good step in that direction. But I know when I went to the Farmer Veteran Coalition, when I was looking for the liaison in New Mexico area, they didn't have one at the time. So it's filling those positions and making those liaisons aware of the programs, and that way they can intersect with the veterans at the right time, whether it be in the TAP class or getting that message and into the service as far as the military benefits office, so that they know those benefits are available prior to leaving service. Because like you said, that's when they're looking at what their next step out of service is going to be. And that's where we need to get the information to them.
Thank you, and I yield back, ma'am.
I now recognize the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Sanchez, I want to thank you for your testimony and the discussion of your family. You were just discussing some involvement of Veterans Liaison. Can you share how you would use that person if they were in fact there in your district and in other places?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So as far as being a veteran in my service and just coming from where I come from, I know myself as more of a face-to-face type person. So you can put information on a website, and I know some are going to gravitate and do website stuff, but just being who I am, I'm face-to-face interaction. So just being able to sit down with somebody and ask them the questions and
In real time, right?
in real time, and tell them my story and say, I grew up on a farm, I'm looking at going back, what is available to help me, and having that liaison be wise in the programs and the different opportunities,
Yeah.
so that way they can hand that information off face-to-face would be a great asset.
Thank you for that. I know that in many areas, we often have new farmers, even our older farmers are unaware of some of the programs that are available to them. I know in my district in the Virgin Islands, we have to share someone with Puerto Rico, and oftentimes they don't have the budget to travel over. We had our only certified organic farmer here in another hearing who was talking about the cost of having to bring someone over. And even that cost share is not enough. So you highlighting how important it is to have someone and be able to answer the questions, have a relationship with someone that you believe is there supporting you, as opposed to just a website to go on to, is really critical. I'm concerned about our veterans, even telemedicine in so many instances is just not doing them and you all the service that you deserve to having people there to walk you through. I want to thank you for sharing that insight with us. Mr. Robinson, I wanted to talk with you about, excuse me, a little bit about the Farm Bill Heirs program, the heirs property provisions. excuse me, we know that we're fortunate to have a network of about 19 historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, which include Alcorn State University, which houses USDA's Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Ranchers Policy Research Center, which seems perfect for the discussion you were talking about. How might USDA benefit from their input as well as the feedback from producers on the ground? And what research gaps might they be able to address?
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. Alcorn is doing at the Minority Farmer Research Policy Center, they're doing a great job of getting into the field and collecting the data on conservation credit and other USDA programs. I think USDA has been a part, and I believe will continue to be a part of the data collecting process. And what we do at the Rural Coalition, because we're grassroots, is that we make sure that the Policy Center develops their research questions based on what's happening, on the farm with the particular farm family. And so it's one thing to build a data set based on academia, but it's another thing to build a data set based on what is actually happening on the farm. And with conservation, one example would be, especially with heirs property, which became a part of the Farm Bill, and we appreciate the committees working with us on that, is that there needs to be more outreach on heirs property and the method in which a farmer gets the information about how taking the problem of heirs property and turn it into an economic benefit, whether it's
So in talking about that economic benefit, you said, your testimony said that the heirs property provision is critically important to areas like Puerto Rico and my district, the Virgin Islands. Why is that?
Well, because in Virgin Island, what we found during the Farm Bill debate as we were drafting these provisions is that you had just gone through a natural disaster, and as you were working with USDA to provide emergency natural resource programs, it was difficult to do that for many families simply because there was not a clear title to land. And so what we've done in this Farm Bill with this heirs property language is that we've allowed the USDA to allow the farmer to use alternative documentations to prove ownership of the land, whether that's through a lease or whether the farmer has paid the taxes on the land for a certain period of time. And we remember very clearly working with your office on making sure we got the language right, and so we appreciate that.
Thank you so much for that information, and thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. With the first round of questions completed and without objection, we will begin a second round of questions. Members will be recognized for 5 minutes in order of seniority, and I will first recognize the ranking member, Mr. Lamalfa from California.
Thank you. I'm going to defer to Mr. Allen here since he has an appointment, so I'll come back later. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And to move on from the commodity pricing, and of course we hope to get to achieve the USMCA trade deal, which I'm assuming in the livestock business that's going to be a plus for you. And so you might just comment on what you see right now and what you see in the future. And of course we got trade issues that we've got that are in negotiations we've got to finalize. Just how important are these trade agreements and the increasing our ability to sell our goods at a fair price, not only here but around the world? Yes, just go ahead, sir. We'll just move down the line real quickly.
Thank you very much. Trying on the local farm level, trying to understand the national politics is challenging, but in what I read and what I understand, it's supremely important to get these trade barriers knocked down, where we can get back in, into Japan, get into China, and deal with our competitors around the world. I mean, U.S. beef is recognized around the world as the best there is.
Right.
So we need to be able to sell it, and that'll trickle back. I mean, it all
Well, you need to
comes back.
sell it, but it also matters how much you sell it for, right?
Correct. And it all comes back to the smaller farm can benefit, as much or more than anybody from that, because, I
Right.
mean, they're the ones that get hit the most when the prices drop. The bigger farm, you can weather, whether it's climate change, it's easier to weather if you're a bigger farm, or all the bumps are easier to weather the bigger you are. So the
Yeah.
smaller farms and the beginning farms, they all get hurt the most by the
Yeah.
bumps, whatever they are, they get hurt the most.
Any other quick comments?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, especially being from New Mexico and so close to Mexico. I've seen the drop out there in the beef prices because there has been somewhat of a flood of foreign beef coming across, just like a lot of the other agriculture products. So trying to find that niche market
Yeah.
is harder. But if
Right.
we have some fair practices, we can
Yeah.
trade and work.
And I wanted to get to,
Outside.
that fourth point is labor. We have a huge labor shortage, which you've mentioned here in this country right now, and this Congress is doing nothing about it. I mean, zero. And that's sad, because we could grow this economy a lot faster if we could come together in a bipartisan way and fix this labor issue, and it can be fixed. I will also, and we talk about the climate change issue, and I look at you guys in the livestock business. I guess you know your cows are a bit of a problem, according to some who have knowledge about this. But I just got to tell you, we're producing more than we've ever produced in this country. By far, 120, 25%. In fact, the whole world's producing more than apparent. I mean, we could feed the world if we could get rid of corrupt leadership. But I do have to tell this story. Somebody asked me, when was the first time I had ever heard of climate change? And I said, well, it was in Sunday school when I was a young person. I said, that flood in Noah's time was a big deal. It had never rained before. Now, can you imagine that? Can you imagine? Because God watered the earth through the dew on the earth, and then all of a sudden we had a storm and we had rain. Now, I guess that was the beginning of climate change, and then I guess we got to figure out who is in charge of the weather and how we can help him figure this thing out. But I thought I'd share that with you, and I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Maine for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for having a chance to ask you all another question, and thank you again for your indulgence in being here. So, Mr. White, I did want to ask you about climate change impacts in your farm, but I'm also interested in the fact that you are sharing your expertise in rotational grazing to help other farmers, because that just seems increasingly important as people understand the value of permanent pasture and raising cattle on rotational grazing. So thank you for doing that. It seems like an interesting opportunity, and I see also you're trying to expand your ability to raise grass-fed beef, which I think, again, comes at an increasing price and premium price as people are more concerned about how things are raised, as Ms. Lafleur was talking about. So do you want to talk about either of those things and how it's going in your area?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. The climate change issue, understanding that on my scale, it's hard. The biggest deal we're dealing with is the extremes, the extreme cold, the extreme wet. I mean, I can say that 2019 was probably the worst year I've had farming. You build up, you do the savings account, like I say, you try and do things right and you'll weather the storm, but this has been our worst year, starting last year, this time when it started raining and it wouldn't stop and it got hot, So getting the information out as things change and helping farmers, especially the smaller ones, figure those things out, it's key, getting the information out. And doing it, as Mr. Sanchez says, having a person to talk to and getting coordination between the different agencies is a big help. the rotational grazing and the direct marketing side of what I'm doing, it's a real desire of mine to sell my beef to people I know. You know, we'd gotten in with a butcher shop, and we were selling, you know, one animal a week. And grass finishing one animal a week is a pretty big deal where, you know, I was selling 5 a year to, you know, friends of the elementary school crowd where the kids went. And, you know, and that was nice. But then when we got to one a week, I mean, that was a big deal. But then that butcher shop didn't make it. So now we're starting over. And it's a big investment, and it's something I want to do. The local food movement is big, but I just don't want to sell local beef. I want to sell good local beef and do it right. So it's a learning process, and there's not a whole lot of people out there doing it. And you know, the rotational grazing, the management of sustainable farm, all of those keywords that's what we do every day.
Right.
And trying to put it all together is the hard part. You know, it's picking your head up from working hard and stopping and looking around and trying to figure it out, and then go back to working, and then, you know, there's a lot to try and figure out.
This wasn't actually on my list of questions, but since you're talking about it, I'm the co-sponsor of a bill called the Prime Act with Representative Massey, one of my Republican colleagues from Kentucky, and that's really to increase the availability of local slaughterhouses, and that lack of infrastructure seems to be a problem in most places, and it's not on the list, but it's certainly a concern. And is that something you've had to deal with, trying to raise local products and sell it locally?
Very much so. You know, we've been selling, you know, freezer beef for 15 years, and you know, it's an hour-and-a-half drive to the nearest butcher shop. You know, we've got a new one that's about an hour away that's much bigger and holds a lot of promise, but it's being able to sell the product, and it's educating the consumer about the product, and everybody wants, you know, 400 fillets and 2 packs of ground beef, you know, so it's like the cow's not built that way. So it's, you know, there's a lot to work through, but more USDA licensing. You know, some of the western counties in Virginia, they've got a mobile processing out there, and I think there's several states around the country where I've seen articles on that, and that's an excellent idea. And, you know, people want to know where their food's coming from. And it's a good thing.
Mr. Sanchez, you were nodding your head. Have you experienced that too?
Yes, ma'am. As you help the beginning farmer in the end, it helps a lot on this side, but there is a big bathtub in that processing, in those slaughterhouse and the facilities to get that local quality product to the table. There is a big bathtub right there, and that is a huge deficit right now.
Yeah, it does seem like with increasing opportunities, particularly with people's interest in locally raised and processed animals and vegetables, everything else, we've lost a lot of our infrastructure that would have been there in places like Maine and other states 50 years ago. This wouldn't have been so complicated, or 100 years ago. Interestingly, we had a lot more facilities to process food and process animals, and finding a way to get that infrastructure back seems critically important. Thank you. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you again. Back to Mr. Robinson here. Again, I wanted to, you know, the subject being the access to these programs for, you know, different types of farmers and ranchers. I just wanted to let you elaborate a little bit on what are the gaps been in the outreach? What does outreach really look like? How do you find people? How do you connect them towards what they don't know about or don't seem to know about, or connect them in a way that maybe eligibility had been an issue and that gap is bridged? Please speak about that a little bit.
Yes, thank you, sir, for your question. The 5% set-asides, whether it's minority producer or whether it's new and beginning or veteran producer, that does exist, but that money runs out at some point. But even in the presence of the 5% set-aside with both categories, a producer who would be eligible under those categories may not meet the ranking criteria as you've heard the panel talk about today. So when I mentioned the ranking category, if that producer's conservation concern, whether it be water or soil, does not meet the the conservation practice that's accepted by the state or accepted by the local conservation technical committee, within that new and beginning producer or minority producer may not be able to participate in the program for not just eligibility purposes, but for ranking purposes. And so what we like about the Farm Bill is that it gives the state conservationists quite a bit of flexibility to work with the ranking criteria in order to reach those producers that are being missed. And typically, our organization, we're here about a producer who has not participated because of ranking once they've been denied. And so what we do is, through the land grant system, whether it's an 1862 or whether it's an 1890 institution, we work to inform the state technical committees, to inform the state conservationists on using their flexibility to reach down and serve the producer that we're concerned with.
Okay, thank you. Touch briefly on educational opportunities, meaning just more directly telling people that don't know about that. And then I want to come to Mr. Sanchez for my final 1 minute, please.
There are a number of conferences that take place around the country annually that we attend. So farmers have a chance to become educated, and then our field organizations have specialists in conservation who will go out and meet face-to-face with an individual farm family. So
For those that don't go to conferences per se, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So those opportunities are available, but I think the main part and the main point that we make here is that if the state technical committee or if the local technical committee does not understand the natural resource concern on a minority farmer or a new and beginning farmer, which is different from a 1,000-acre farm, then most likely that policy that's set by the state technical committee will actually miss the need of that smaller farms.
Gotcha. Thank you. Mr. Sanchez, you kind of perked my ears up on that 10-year end date. That really kind of struck me for veterans, where there's not a lot of end date on being a veteran, et cetera. So speak a little bit about, in general, your own experience was that you applied on a non-veteran status and you were turned down, but a veteran status did put you in play there. So to just touch a little bit in the remaining time on that and how important that was, and how did you find out about that?
Yes, sir, thank you. The initial equip that I did apply for was under beginning farmer and rancher, and that was in 2011. In 2014, I wasn't aware of the veteran, so I applied for a second. And I received it this last year under the veteran status. And it was really through the Farmer Veteran Coalition and talking with them that I learned that the Farm Bill had changed from the original time I applied in 11 to recognize veteran as underserved and minority group.
How'd you find out about the Farmer Veteran Coalition?
I think I just talked to one of my friends about it, and they pointed me to the website because as a National Guard.
That reminds me of the scene in A Few Good Men where they're trying to find where in the manual how you find the mess hall, but that's
right.
Something else.
Yeah, exactly. So through the National Guard, I had a lot of people out there, farm, ranch, and everything, and they're like, "Hey, have you heard about this?" And I found it, and I applied for one of the scholarships to go to the conference, and that's how I heard about it. Was at the conference in Kansas City.
Okay, I know I'm a little over time. all the way down the panel. Just a 1 or 2 word answer. Are we doing better? Yes or no? Irvin and everybody?
Yes, sir. We are doing better.
Yes, sir, I would agree. It is getting better. It's not there yet, but it is getting better.
Yes, sir, getting better, but always an opportunity for improvement.
Sure, thank you.
Yes, sir, I think you need more people
Okay,
to
thank
get
you.
the boots on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Before we adjourn, I'd invite the ranking member to make any closing remarks that he may have.
I already used up my extra minutes. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Well, I want to thank our witnesses today, and I want to emphasize our commitment to continuing our efforts to ensure agriculture is a profession that values and enables the contributions of farmers and ranchers of all backgrounds. I thank you for the insights that you've brought to this discussion related to current efforts under the 2018 Farm Bill, what's working, what could be better, and thank you for the frank assessment that we are doing better, but we can always continue to do better. When we're talking about some of the efforts and the endeavors that you all are pursuing, it's fantastic to see the tie that they all bring together in terms of what rotational grazing is doing, not just for the farmers who are engaging in it, but for our efforts to address climate change, and how ranchers like yourself, Mr. White, are able to bring that knowledge and ideally investments in infrastructure back to other farmers in the area. As we've heard today, not only is it important, but it is required that if we are going to mitigate the effects of climate change, support the next generation of our producers, and create economic opportunities across our rural communities, we need to understand the challenges that we are facing in rural America. Rural America is facing numerous challenges, but fortunately, we have a diverse and growing number of farmers that are eager to do the work, and we must ensure here in Congress and across the country that every farmer has the tools that they need to succeed across the country. So thank you so much for being with us today. I appreciate your time, your frank answers. And under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question posed by a member. The hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry is adjourned.